Should old acquaintance be forgotten, never brought back to mind? So begins the traditional Scottish New Year's Eve song. One thing that Joe Biden would likely prefer to be forgotten as we move into the new year is his administration's history of climate policy failures. But while Joe Biden may be an expert when it comes to forgetting things, we are here to remind him just how wrong he got it. Steve Milloy over at junkscience.com compiled a list of the 10 underreported climate flops of 2021. And I'd like to highlight a few of them for you. One of the most egregious because of the associated loss of life was the Texas blackout this past February that resulted in more than 200 people losing their lives after cold weather froze wind turbines that supplied 30% of the state's power. Another failure that we're continuing to feel today is Biden's war on domestic oil production, which has led to a greater dependence on foreign powers that actively collude to gouge us on oil prices. All this has left you and millions of everyday Americans going broke at the pump in order to maintain their basic commute. But calling this one a loss for the left might be a bit of a mistake. Many openly acknowledge that high gas prices are used as a tool to push people to electric vehicles, which just happens to benefit people like Hunter Biden, who has financial interests in the cobalt mines used to make electric car batteries, or people like Biden's Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm, who hold up to a $5 million stake in electric battery producer Proterra. But as so is often the case with the Biden administration, it is difficult to draw the line between success and failure when so much of what they do seems to be literally failure by design. So here with us now to help walk us through more of Biden's climate flops is biostatistician and founder of junkscience.com, Steve Milloy. Thanks for joining us tonight, Steve.
Hey, Kara. Thanks for having me.
Great. So what a list you have here. Which on the list of fails, I guess you could call them this year, really stands out to you the most?
Well, I think the biggest and most important one is the ongoing energy crisis that we're experiencing right now. It's a global energy crisis. It started in Europe, and it was caused by green policies. You know, over the past 20 years, Europe has gotten rid of its coal plants, has replaced them with windmills and maybe a little bit of gas. And so this year, unexpectedly, there has been a decline in wind production of about 20%. And because there are almost no coal plants left in Europe, they were forced to fall back on their gas plants, and of course that sent gas prices through the roof. And we're talking about 400-500%. And that has caused a global energy crisis now. It's all because, as you know, we've been warning for literally decades now. You know, wind is not reliable. You cannot depend on it. And you mentioned earlier the Texas debacle, where 200 Americans were killed because of reliance on wind. Well, in Europe, they're thinking that energy poverty is going to go from 50 million to 80 million now because of the spike in energy prices. The factories have had to shut down, fertilizer plants have had to shut down, which is going to affect agriculture. It's just been a giant disaster, and it's all because of these green policies.
I mean, and speaking of these, policy failures and how they really line the back pockets of so many of these different groups that claim to be doing it to help all of us, to try and turn the tides of people dying because of weather or climate-related instances and circumstances, and of course, and they only make it much worse. We also highlight a story that I guess had escaped even my attention, and I have it here: Nature Conservancy selling phony carbon offsets to publicly traded companies. Can you talk to us about that?
Well, sure. A lot of companies buy so-called carbon offsets. And the idea is that, we're still emitting, but we're also planting trees someplace. And the planting of trees is somehow absorbing our emissions. Of course, this is totally bogus because the emissions are happening now in great quantities. And if trees, in fact, are sequestering carbon, they're doing so at a much slower rate. And then ultimately, who knows how much carbon is being sequestered, certainly not as much as being as emitted. But the Nature Conservancy was caught this year. I still don't know how they were caught, but they were caught selling phony carbon offsets. They were selling carbon offsets to publicly traded companies like Disney and BlackRock and JP Morgan, who were bragging to their customers, investors, how they're green. So they're buying these phony offsets from the Nature Conservancy, which is the largest and, I hate to say most well-respected, but the most respected environmental group in the U.S. And so it's like this trifecta of fraud. You've got carbon offsets, which are phony to start with. The Nature Conservancy is then selling fake offsets. And then the buyers of these fake offsets are then touting them to their investors as, aren't we green? And it's just this fraud trifecta.
It's just still absolutely amazing to me. And these are the people we're supposed to be listening to on all this. Another thing we've heard for so long is that they're trying to get rid of coal, and that's one of their, first steps along this toward this green future. And yet, as you point out, COP26, they didn't consign coal to the dustbin of history, did they?
No, so that was the theme of COP26, consigning coal to history. And that was the phrase they used, consign coal to history. And the whole thing was just, a failure because, the world's largest coal burner, China, didn't even show up to COP. Russia, another large coal burner, coal supplier, didn't show up either. Joe Manchin in the U.S. exercised his own veto. Joe Manchin is from coal-heavy West Virginia. To kill Biden's clean electricity performance program, which would have gotten rid of coal in the United States by 2030. And the reality is, although COP26 wanted to consign coal to history, the fact is that right now we are burning more coal than ever before. And that number is only going up in the next couple of years at least. And so COP26 can only be deemed a total failure.
And we have about a minute or so before I have to let you go. But one thing that just is always hilarious to me is because the people that are the most climate alarmists, they end up buying multi-million-dollar houses on the beach that they claim are going to be, awash in water within, the rising sea tides in a few years. But also you had some polling numbers showing that Americans who claim that they're just so worried with climate change, but they don't want to pay to fix things.
Yeah, so there are a lot of climate polls out there trying to show that, Americans are really concerned about climate. And if you ask people, yeah, they're all concerned about the environment. Who doesn't want a clean environment? But when you ask people, how much are you willing to pay for climate? You get some pretty shocking answers, which are always under or not reported in the media. And this particular Associated Press poll that I highlighted in my piece on junkscience.com is that about half the people weren't willing to spend like $1 a month. Now, that's a big fail when you're being told that the world is going to end unless we spend trillions of dollars on climate, and you're not willing to spend $1 a month. That's a big marketing fail.
That is, and I think it shows that truly people don't buy it, despite what they say to fit in with the crowds. They don't actually truly buy it. But, Steve, always a pleasure having you on. Looking forward to 2022. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Right. Happy New Year.
And on that note, we now turn to our law and justice story. A shocking new report out of Harris County, Texas, shows that in that county alone,